On the Statue of Liberty are written the indelible words of poet Emma Lazarus, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." However, these words have been added to the Statue of Liberty decades after its completion in the U.S., and much like how these inspirational words on immigration were not always found on the Statue of Liberty, the sentiments in favor of immigration were not always found within the U.S. After America had gained its independence in 1776, it ideologically established itself as a place that was, in the words of Thomas Paine, the asylum for the persecuted lovers of civil and religious liberty from every part of Europe. Initially within the U.S., English immigration was predominant, with other European ethnicities believing in Protestantism trailing behind. Africans comprised 13% of the total population after the slave trade and would stagnate due to most Americans being against the African immigration. This preference could be clearly observed in a Naturalization Act that allowed immediate citizenship for any white immigrants to the U.S. Initial immigration into the U.S. would remain rather constant at 6,000 immigrants per year, but this immigration would be slowed by the disruption of Atlantic shipping lanes in 1806 and the War of 1812.
Soon after, the conception of demographics and immigration in the U.S. had been cemented, but these trends would soon fade away due to a massive increase in immigration into the U.S., particularly among the Irish. This large influx of Irish immigration would showcase both the profound benefits and detriments of immigration in the city of New York. Ireland would experience the catastrophic event of the Great Potato Famine in 1845, which would cause most Irish farmers to be unable to feed their families, causing them to emigrate to the United States. This group of Irish immigrants would flood to the U.S. through the port city of New York. Within New York, these Irish immigrants would be forced into inhumane living conditions due to the low wages they were paid. The low wages of all immigrants would happen because of the steady supply of new immigrants willing to work for lower wages than the established workers into the labor force. And while the low labor wages of the Irish would better the condition of the upper and middle class through lowering the price of mass-produced goods, the immigrants themselves and lower class in the United States would suffer from labor being devalued, sowing the seeds for anti-immigrant sentiments. The Irish would retreat into their own communities and would refuse to assimilate into American society because they had enough communal support from other Irish immigrants and due to their poor treatment at the hands of the American citizens and businesses. This retreat of the Irish is called a cultural enclave, a phenomenon defined by an ethnic or cultural group of immigrants refusing to interact or acclimate with their new host nation. The Irish cultural enclave would come to a head in the New York City draft riots of 1864, when the Irish were drafted into the U.S. military but refused to join because they did not see themselves as American, nor were they ever treated as such by native-born Americans. During this time period, German immigrants also came to the U.S. en masse because of the 1848 revolutions in continental Europe, further increasing the amount of Germans found in the U.S.
Chinese and Irish immigration to the U.S. were two major surges of immigration that would truly stoke anti-immigration sentiments within the U.S., with their large-scale movement leading to the creation of nativist movements and the implementation of anti-immigration policies by the U.S. government. The primary nativist movement of the mid to late 19th century was the American Party, or the Know-Nothing Party, founded in 1855 and officially dissolving in 1860. The Know-Nothing Party was primarily comprised of Protestant white Americans who opposed immigration due to the lowering of wages and subsequent loss of jobs for American citizens and a general disdain for cultural enclaves and Catholic influence in the U.S. Italian immigrants would also begin to surge in the U.S. through New York, much like the Irish before them, and much more like the Irish, the Italians would undergo similar discrimination. After the surge in Chinese immigration during the mid-19th century, the U.S. government decided to implement the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. The Chinese Exclusion Act would stop all Chinese immigration to the U.S. in order to try and stem the flow with the Chinese in the U.S. and to maintain ethnic demographics, a policy that would come to define the next 70 years of immigration policy. The U.S. would directly implement the maintenance of demographics as its primary concern in determining immigration policy with the Immigration Act of 1924, signed by U.S. President Calvin Coolidge. The Immigration Act of 1924 would create a new quota system for U.S. immigration that would take in a certain number of immigrants for a particular year and would limit the immigration of each country based off of the total percentage of the population that any particular ethnicity made up in the U.S., according to the U.S. Census. The census reported the primary racial demographics in 1920 as being 88% European, 10% African, and less than 1% being other primary racial groups. U.S. racial demographics would largely remain around these percentages as a result of the Immigration Act of 1924. This immigration policy would persist and would be taken to a further extreme in 1942 when U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was signed into effect Executive Order 9066, which would intern Japanese citizens and limit Japanese immigrants because of the perceived threat of Japanese spies among the American population due to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Eventually in the 60s, the U.S. experienced the rise of the Civil Rights Movement, which would fight against racial biases within American society and would inspire the U.S. government under President Lyndon B. Johnson to expand immigration to all, regardless of present demographics.
With the signing of the Immigration Act of 1964 by President Lyndon B. Johnson, marking a radical change in the United States immigration policy that had never been seen before, completely eliminating the objective to maintain demographics. Most of the United States population were not in favor of the new immigration policy initially. It is now a hotly debated topic 50 years later. The demographic that would become the most prominent during this time period was that of the Hispanics. Prior to the Immigration Act of 1964, the Hispanic population always remained under 2.2% of the population. But after the new Immigration Act took effect, their total population would grow exponentially in the United States, making them so prominent to where some suggest that Spanish has become an official language of the United States. Illegal immigration would also increase in the United States due to the economic and political issues found within South American countries during the late 20th century, making illegal immigration a more relevant issue in the United States politics than it was ever before. During the presidency of Ronald Reagan from 1980 to 1988, Republicans in the United States would be far more lenient on illegal immigration because of how it stimulated and supported the free market. Who knew? Reagan exemplified this in the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 that would grant amnesty to all illegal immigrants before 1982. Likewise, during the presidency of Bill Clinton, Democrats were staunchly against illegal immigration as clearly defined in the President Bill Clinton's State of the Union address in 1995. Democrats were previously opposed to amnesty and illegal immigration because of the lowering of wages for the working class in the United States, which the Democratic Party used to prioritize. However, eventually, both the Republicans and Democrats would undergo radical shifts in regards to their views on immigration as the ideas of nationalism and diversity became more popular in both parties, respectively. Now, immigration has become one of, if not the most contentious political concept in the present day after it was popularized by Republican candidate Donald Trump in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Modern-day demographics are indicative of the growing diversity within the United States and show just how far the view of this issue have changed in making immigration widely accepted and supported, with the only questions remaining as to whether or not the caliber of immigrants and the way with which they enter the country matters. So, in conclusion, the United States immigration policy and the public opinion might have begun in being favored of white Protestants during the 18th and 19th centuries, but it has certainly expanded its horizon, bringing a great number of ethnic groups, resulting in the more diverse demographics within the United States. Immigration can be both good and bad in a multitude of different ways, but one can't deny that this controversial issue has had a profound impact on the identity of our nation. Although some might feel that the United States is deficient in how it conducts itself domestically and internationally, we can rediscover some of the greatness of the United States by remembering that, in the words of former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, a simple way to take measure of a country is to look at how many want in and how many want out.